And, when I hear the stories of these little kids that are in the fourth grade that haven't had a chance to see their mother in person because she's still in Guatemala, and they haven't seen her in 4 years and they're 8 years old. I mean, those are the things that, and their dad is here working every day and they live 3 and 4 families in an apartment and they're just trying to make a better life for their kids. And the fact that we as a society shun that instead of opening the doors and going, what we need is more of this. We need more people that come here and believe in that American dream and are willing to work every day to make all of our lives more rich and better.
Welcome to episode 51 of People Are the Answer. I truly believe that people are the only answer to the world's many problems. I'm Jeffrey M. Zucker, a serial entrepreneur here to learn how innovators are creating outsized, transformational social impact. Today's episode features Will Hoge, a prolific, Grammy-nominated singer-songwriter who supports human rights through his music and never hesitates to stand up for what he believes in. 2023 marks 20 years since I began listening to Will and going to his shows. Years ago, when he began making big statements with his music, I really respected his willingness to take risks with his platform for good, and I've seen his work make true impact in people's lives. Will and I talk about his journey to being a musician, going from all rock and roll to a family man, the accident that almost took his life, using music to create positive change, and much more. Here is Will Hoge on People Are the Answer. Will, thanks so much for joining me on People Are the Answer.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I mean, really, it's my honor. I've been a big fan for a long time of both your music as well as your ability to make statements for things that you care about. So I was excited to get you on.
Well, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So if you could just start off by telling the listeners who you are, where you're based, and what you do.
I am a singer-songwriter from Nashville, Tennessee. My name is Will Hoge. Was born and raised here and been slugging out a living in this crazy business for close to 30 years at this point. And father of 2 and husband of 1 and just trying to live a decent life every single day.
I love it. And some of it was alluded to there, but in life, what would you say motivates you?
Well, I mean, that's change. I think that changes a lot if you live long enough to get to do anything for very long. I don't know that your motivation can stay the same. I think in, my 20s when I started doing this, the motivation was just to be in a band and get to ride around and play songs, write songs and play them for people with people that you loved. I mean, it was really simple at the start, and then that changes and it becomes, as you get older, then at least for me, things other than music became important. When I met my wife, I'd never thought about being a husband at all, much less a good husband. That's a whole nother conversation. So, that's a game changing moment that keeps you inspired. And then kids, same thing. I never wanted to be a dad. And, stumbling into the first one and then intentionally doing the second one, those moments are incredibly inspiring. And, to now have boys that are 16 and almost 13, watching them become their own people, watching my wife venture into her own world. I mean, I find inspiration. I think it was sort of myopic when you start this business. It's incredibly selfish. You're just inspired by you and what you want for you. And that gets lonely pretty quick. So it's been fun for me to sort of expand that sphere of influence and find inspiration in friends and family and just the world at large. Has been really helpful for me.
I like how you put that in terms of how things have changed over time. I can relate. I have 2 young boys, 2.5 and about 3 months
Oh
old,
yeah,
and so yeah, I can definitely relate to how it changes motivation, and you sort of have to determine how to live the life that's not only good for you but great for them as well.
yeah, and it's an interesting thing, especially in this business that I'm in. There's so much. Um, there's a certain level of egoism that you have to do this. There's a certain level of narcissism that you have to think I'm going to write songs and put my name on a building in cities all over the world and think people are going to pay to come and see me do what I do. There's a level of narcissism in that is you have to have. It's the healthy balance of like not becoming a narcissist. And yeah, it's been really good. Like I said, the kids in particular were huge regulators of that for me right from the get go because they just don't care. And your kids are kind of at that age. I remember, I could go out and have the greatest shows that I think I've ever had, and I'd come home and they didn't care. They just wanted to go ride big wheels in the yard. And, same thing, I could have the worst run of shows and think that my career was in the shitter. And then I come home and they just wanted to go ride big wheels in the yard. Like it just didn't matter. And there was a perspective that came with that was really beneficial for me.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Just getting home from anything,
Yeah.
and it's just like, great, dad's here.
Mhm.
You mentioned growing up in the Nashville area. What was it like there growing up?
Different than it is now. I mean, this town has changed in the 10 minutes we've been on this conversation. There's 3 new high rises that have gone up. It really was a very small town growing up here. And that's changed. I mean, you go around now and you really do see it's a global city at this point. There's people from all over that come here. And I get why. It's still one of my favorite cities on the planet. I don't want to live anywhere else. But the changes are, it's the twofold thing. It's like, what's the balance of healthy growth with also making sure that we can take care of the people that we need to live and work and make this city the special place that it is.
So, growing up in Charleston, I can really relate to that. You've been to Charleston a lot over the years. I'm sure you've seen similarly to Nashville that it's grown a lot, and there's that balance of too much growth and maintaining versus maintaining the character.
Yeah, and how do you maintain the character and keep the local, one of the things I've always loved about traveling, when you would go to Charleston, there were special places that you would only find in Charleston. The last thing that I think most people want is to walk down King Street and go to Chipotle. I mean, like we can, and it's nothing against Chipotle. I've eaten Chipotle on the road, like, but you sort of expect that from a mall. You don't necessarily expect that from, this great historical place where, you want to see um, different kind of unique things that aren't available everywhere else.
Well, what was Nashville like when you were a kid? How did you grow up?
It was still just a really small town. It was interesting because my folks have grown up here, my grandparents have grown up here. Um, you just kind of knew everybody, and it was a great place to grow up because it was really that sort of burgeoning place of you got to watch. I don't know that there's anybody alive today that got to watch Manhattan become Manhattan, where it goes from just this little borough into all of a sudden it's this uh, incredible, vibrant city. And this was that way. Obviously, we're not to the level of Manhattan, but when you go from 0 to 60 as fast as we have, and it was a great place to grow up and be a musician and be an artist because you got to really see other people in the music business. The fame wasn't the driver for people to do this. The wanting to be in the music business, whether that was being a great writer or a great guitar player or a great guitar tech or a great front of house engineer, it made making a living in the music business something that was very attainable and believable and wasn't about fame, which I really appreciated about growing up here.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And um, you know, we mentioned briefly, you care about human rights a lot. You bring your causes into sort of your platform. Do you think there were any experiences or a specific experience from childhood that sort of imprinted on you the importance of people and giving back?
Yeah, I mean, there was a ton of that. I was always, my mother's family's Jewish, my father's family was Methodist. So I grew up in, the deep South with this sort of bastardized um, religious upbringing. I really didn't believe in any of it, but I got to see the ugly sides of all of it. And, the racism that was rampant, and it's better now, but it's not good. There's still a lot of that, and I grew up insulated from it in a lot of ways. Within the walls of my home, those were things that just weren't tolerated. And so, yeah, I think a lot of things, I saw the little guy getting picked on all the time, I feel like. And that always just stuck with me. I don't like it. I didn't like it then. I don't like it now. And, and it's always the same argument aimed at a different group of people. If it's either it's Jews or it's blacks or it's gays or it's lesbians or it's trans, and it's the same tired argument. And I hate it for the folks that are really having to fight that um, on a daily basis. It's hard to watch and unfair for me to just sit on the sidelines and go, well, it doesn't affect me. Um, that's important. It's always been important for me not to live my life that way. It's important for my sons to not grow up and see the world in that way.
That's great to hear. And, you know, my dad, one of his sayings was, don't be a bystander to hate. And it sounds like, you're trying to preach similarly to your
That's
kids.
exactly right. I mean, I think that's an incredible way of putting it because it really is that simple. I mean, and I don't know. I mean, I think that's something that you can learn throughout your life. I think I was really fortunate to pick that up early on, and and not that I've always gotten it right either. That's not to toot my own horn like that. I mean, the goal is to also, when you get things wrong, is just being able to own that and do better. I mean, that's the thing. I think sometimes as white dudes, there's this fear of, well, if we do anything wrong, people are going to think. It's like, you fucked up. You said the thing you shouldn't say. Learn from it. Don't do it again. If it's sincere, I've not met a marginalized group of people yet that can't accept an apology and and help you understand what you need to do to be better as an ally and a friend moving forward. It's not something to be intimidated by.
Yeah, and that's important for people to hear. It's okay to mess up as long as you are willing to evolve and change with it. And I think that's another thing. And obviously, I'm a big fan, and I think we relate on a lot of things. Another is we both grew up in the South, and like that the song "Southern Man." I feel similarly in that I grew up being taught a lot of these conservative things that, looking back, a lot of it was not good, and it took me time though to evolve away from those things. But with life experience, I was able to, and like looking back on maybe some things that I said as a teenager that I just was copying people around me. I can't fault myself for that, but I just have to know that I can be better.
Yeah, I mean, I tell the story that the whole Still a Southern Man song is really written around that idea because when I grew up, all of our schools, in Franklin, it was the Franklin Rebels. It was the Franklin Junior High School Rebels, Franklin High School Rebels. We had a Confederate soldier as the mascot, and there was a rebel flag, and I loved it. I thought the rebel flag was this really cool, rebellious thing. It was like, you can't tell us what to do, is what it meant in my little sheltered mind. And, it was a great learning experience because I don't think at that point you could have sat me down and told me these things. I don't know that I would have heard it. But as I got out and saw the world, and you really start to realize the things that are um, bigger than just your little mind and your little corner of the world. And that's not a hard for me. That was not a hard thing to go, oh, yeah, I got that wrong. Um, I don't have any shame or guilt about it. I understand wholly why I did it. And the goal now is to make sure that I don't repeat those same mistakes, make sure that my kids don't repeat those same mistakes. And I don't know, it was a big learning experience. But yeah, I think that travel and seeing things outside of our little bubbles, um, it's vital.
Absolutely. And I want to dig into your career, but first, I want to just kind of share with the listeners about how I became a fan. This year actually marks 20 years since I started listening to your music and started going to your shows at the Music Farm. I was 15. I'm 35. Uh, and the first time I saw you live, at the Music Farm. So originally I'd heard you on 96 Wave. I'm sure it was The Critic that was playing you. And I think it was Secondhand Heart that I heard first. And then, pretty soon after that, Not That Cool blew up locally. Was always hearing it everywhere. And then, that year went to see you at the Music Farm.
Yeah, Charleston was one of those towns. There was, 96 Wave, and you had Critic, and you had Dave Rossi, and that whole bunch. And there just really was a music scene there. And that was one of the stations. That's the closest that I ever got to rock stardom. I mean, really, with like, if rock stardom is songs on the radio like that, that was the place more so than anywhere else at that time that was really just, I think they played some of those songs enough that it got to the point that people hated those songs, which is really the goal of any artist, is to have a song that is so massive that you go, oh, I hate that song. Why? Because I hear it all the time.
Did you get similar support in Nashville, or was it different because it was a music
It
city?
was different. We got a lot of great support here. There's a great station here called Lightning 100, and they were the very first station to play any of my records, even from the first album Carousel that came out before the one that we're talking about. They've always been great, but it is also it was a smaller AAA independent station, whereas 96 Wave was like a real deal middle of the road rock station. They were playing Lightning 100 was playing, I guess, quote unquote, cooler, more indie stuff, and it was cool to be on there for sure. I'm still cool every time I hear it on there. I'm tickled to death. But 96 Wave was like you were right there with the giants of the day, like just right in the middle. Those people didn't know you were just some yahoo from Nashville that was just trying to, excuse me, just trying to figure it all out. So yeah, that was real special.
Yeah, I certainly miss 96 Wave. And, so starting at 15, I've since been fortunate to see you perform all over the country. Every stop that I've lived in, Boston, Chicago, Denver, I've been able to go see one of your shows there, usually more than one. So it's been awesome as a fan to have you continue and be so prolific with your music. And I'd say, definitely want to share with the audience that not only are you one of my favorite musicians, but you're one of the absolute best live entertainers I've ever experienced. And I've seen a lot of live entertainment, a lot of music. And because of that, I've brought a lot of people to your shows, and I tell them, regardless of what you think of the music, if you pull it up on your phone or whatever, come to a show. And you never disappoint. And there's always that energy and passion. Is that hard to do, to come out every night just giving it?
Yeah, is it hard to do? There's nights that it's harder than others. Because the important thing for me is that's not something I can fake. I decided real early on, like you can't come out, you still get a night or two, especially starting out where you come out and there's 15 people there, and you want to put on a great show for 15 people, but you also can come across as, I never wanted it to be showy, like look at this trick that we do every night. So there's a balance of making sure that I want it to always be emotional. I want it to always be sincere, but I don't always want it to be the same.
And it's not the same. I'll say that, man. Like there's unique experiences, and I remember a lot of them. And sure, there's some tricks I've seen you pull at a couple places, like doing a cappella on the bar, but I don't forget it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, growing up, live music was the one, wanting to be an artist, playing live to me was always the one thing that you could control. I mean, even when you signed a major label record deal, but they couldn't they could try to have an influence on what your record sounded like. They could try to have an influence on where you were marketed and all of those things. But at the end of the day, they couldn't tell me what kind of show I could or couldn't play. And so, and I've always held to the belief that if you can get people into a room and put on a great performance, that they will tell people and come back.
The show's always amazing, and pretty early on in my fandom, you started using your platform to speak out, and that was exciting to me. Even being younger, when I maybe hadn't evolved my thinking enough yet, and maybe we didn't agree on everything at the time, it was something that I respected that you did, because it can be risky, but you stood up for what you believe in, and it was something that was impactful for me. And I'm curious, like, is that just something that sort of naturally happened for you, or did you make like an intentional effort?
Both. I was always attracted to that in, like I say, in sort of just the global idea, the universal sort of arc towards justice is a fascinating concept that I put a lot of faith in. So I was always interested in that. And then from a smaller level, artist wise, the artists that I really love, they're artists that I liked, but the artists that I caught myself really loving, kind of regardless of genre, were the ones that weren't afraid to say something, and I don't think you have to be an exclusively political artist. You had to be Billy Bragg or Woody Guthrie. I mean, not that both of those guys still have other songs too, but not everything has to be a political fight. But I found myself not really loving artists that didn't. The ones I want to know um, what you do think and that you do care. I mean, there's other artists that tell you what they think, and it's like, okay, I think you're an idiot, but at least you told me how you feel. And there's some of that too. And, and I expect it. I knew real early on I had made Carousel and Blackbird, um, and we were going to go in and make another record. That was 2004. And I wanted to make a record called the America EP. And
Yep.
Atlantic.
I was going to guess that's where it
Yeah.
started.
And Atlantic at that point had been really excited. Blackbird had done just well enough to, I think they would have kicked out money for a third record and really wanted to make a push to do the big stardom hunt. But I really wanted to make that record with those songs. And, I talked to both of the presidents at the label, and they said, look, we agree. We totally get it. If that's what you want to do artistically, you should do it. We just can't, as a record label, do that. And I don't know if the thought was cool, he'll leave, or cool, this will break him and he'll come back and do a pop record. But I did that. I went and made that record, and I don't sit and often pontificate about my own importance of my records. I don't mean in the global importance of art, but in my own growth as a writer and as an artist, that record, that EP is that one was pretty important to me because I think it truly did, in my own, whether it did to anybody else or not, it did for me, set me onto a path where I was like, okay, I can walk the walk now if I'm going to talk the talk, or for lack of a better cliche. And I was always real proud of that. I don't think at the time, in the world, in the sphere that I'm operating in, I don't think there was a whole lot of that. And so I was real proud of that one.
And when you signed with Atlantic, was would you have believed yourself if future you was like, oh, I'm gonna ditch these guys pretty quickly here?
No, I would have.
Like, were you excited to sign with them? Was it a
Oh,
big
it was huge,
deal?
man. It was everything that I had dreamed of. I feel like I've always been pretty level-headed about this business and fairly smart about not buying into the sort of dream parts of the illusion, the magic trick of the music business. Um, But I really did get bit hook, line, and sinker with that. I mean, to sign with Atlantic, at the time I had an offer on the table from Atlantic or a really cool new independent label out of Nashville. Um, they had signed, they had just put out a Lucinda Williams record and they had signed Ryan Adams. Those were the two artists. I would have been the third. And I was really excited about that, but I totally bought in on the, Atlantic Records was where Otis Redding made records. It's where Led Zeppelin recorded, and the Rolling Stones were on Atlantic, and Ahmet Ertegun was still running Atlantic. And when he had signed Ray Charles, written songs for Ray Charles. When we went to meet with the people at New York, I mean, we went to Ahmet Ertegun's office and sat there and got the Dog and Pony Show, and he talked about the record because at that point we had made Carousel, and it was kind of out in the world and generating interest. So yeah, it was a
Which I'm a big fan of. I went back after Blackbird.
yeah.
After
Yeah.
I found you, I went
Well,
back.
thank
So
you. Yeah, so I mean, it was a really big deal. I really thought so naively that that was like the launch pad. It's like, well, now we've got this. The next step is just superstardom. I guess that's just how this works. And like I say, I consider myself to be fairly worldly in those situations, but I really did get. I bought in on the whole thing and thought, man, this is it. Like, this is just I've won the lottery. This is going to be incredible. And it was not the case. And I was really bummed when it didn't work out. I think for a long time, I was angry at the business. I tried to blame it on everybody except myself instead of just taking the onus and going, man, this probably just isn't the right fit for what you want to do as an artist. It's not that they don't like you. I still have great relationships with all of those people that I worked with at Atlantic and still work with their artists quite often. So, yeah, I thought it was a really big deal. I mean, for me and for this town at the time to get a major label record deal, it wasn't a country deal, it was kind of a big thing. And yeah, I was really excited about it.
yeah, I believe that. And I do want to dig in more on your career, but I want to go backwards a little bit first. When growing up, when did you first start engaging with music? Was it something that was big in your family? When did you start playing?
I didn't play until way later. I didn't play until I was a senior in high school. I got a guitar when I was 16 or 17. Um, Junior or senior in high school. And I fell in love with music real early. My uncle and my grandfather was in a big band in the 30s and 40s playing saxophone, and then my uncle and my father had both been in rock bands in Nashville. So I was exposed to music as a fan really early, and like not just exposed to it. Like my dad is a music nerd. Like he has a great record collection and a great understanding of he used to tour with with Greg and Dwayne Allman when they had their band the Allman Joys. They would do shows together, so he was hip to what was going on in and around town and in the music business at large. So there was always, you know, it was always sort of on a pedestal in our house. So that part started really early.
Yeah. And then what led you to start playing in high school?
I had started, I mean, I think in the sixth grade, some guys and I had a band where we played at a birthday party, and I was just the singer. I didn't play anything at that point. We just played cover songs, and it was fun. Then right after I got that guitar, some other guys, we just started playing together. One of my best pals was a guitar player, and we'd sit around in my room and play guitar together and sing and do that. And I think one night at a party, we got up. There was a band playing. They took a break, and they said, "Why don't y'all play or something?" We jumped up, and I sang, and he played guitar, and then another kid that we went to school with just sort of jumped up and played drums. And the next thing you know, it was like, well, this is. I remember coming home and waking my parents up and being like, "This is awesome!" Like I couldn't believe that rush, that feeling of playing music in front of people. So that was my last year of school. I went away to college, joined my first sort of real band, and then college went downhill. Music was the clear leader in the clubhouse for me. And so I left there and came back to Nashville and started working at this, still doing a square job a little bit. Excuse me. But yeah, it was pretty pedal to the metal from that point to just do this full time.
I remember during one of your COVID lockdown live streams, you mentioned that what you're saying, that you went to college and that you wanted to be a writer initially.
I wanted to be
Is
a
that right?
basketball coach and
Oh,
a
okay.
history teacher. Yeah.
I don't know where I got writer from then. But yeah, now that you say that, I remember basketball coach and history teacher. And then, but you were just really feeling the music and decided that was the path.
Yeah. I mean, they to be a history teacher and a basketball coach, you had to graduate college and have a certain GPA. To be singer and songwriter, you needed neither of those two things. So that worked out better
Yeah,
for me.
I get it. Well, you really, it went into quite the career after that. How soon after you decided to really dig in was it that you put Carousel out? I know that I believe you had a band called Spoonful
Mm-hmm.
before that.
Yeah. I left school and came home in 94, maybe. And then Spoonful was around 96, 97. And then 98 or 99, that band had fallen apart. And I realized at that point I had gone with my friend Dylan Altman, who's a great writer and guitar player. We had gone to see Bob Dylan at Municipal Auditorium in Nashville. And, I loved Bob as a songwriter and all of those things, but I'd never seen him play. And he had this really phenomenal band on stage, and it was kind of a light bulb moment for me. It was like, oh, that's like, he's not in a band. He's just the guy that writes the songs, and then he puts together this cool ensemble to go present the songs. So that was kind of this, like I say, aha moment where I was like, well, I'm the one that's writing the songs and hanging the flyers and doing all the shit anyway. I might as well I don't want to have to every 6 months when a guitar player leaves or a bass player quits or drummer gets somebody pregnant. I got to come up with a different band name and then figure out all this shit. Like I just want to. So at that point, it was like, I'm just going to do it myself. And I guess 98 had started playing shows around town. We captured a live show at the Exit Inn off of the soundboard, and we sort of pressed up copies of it, which was ridiculous when you think about it. But that led to some interest from other places. We were able to start to tour around, and pretty quickly after that, I mean, Carousel, I think I had signed a deal and did Carousel in 99 or 2000. So it was probably a 6-year process from getting back to Nashville to sort of really launching the ship, I guess.
Well, from there, you've been a prolific writer. You released 10 studio albums, 3 EPs, 5 live albums, 6 singles. You know, it's been really incredible. And kind of like you were saying with the solo aspect, from a fan's perspective, you don't have to worry about the band breaking up. It's one guy that's doing his thing. So I certainly appreciate that.
Thank you.
And, what does writing music mean to you? Some artists have told me, they feel like they have to get this thing out of their system that's in there. What's it taken for you to be so continuous in your writing?
Some of it is that. I mean, I think that, again, and you've probably talked to a ton of people about it that do this for a living. I think there is some of it that is just nearly genetic. It's a thing that you just have to do. I think there's a mental wellness probably to it, that if you don't really get the thoughts out, they become cancerous in some ways, I feel like. So there's that. I find for myself too, there's an interesting thing. We live in a world and operate in a business where youth is cherished in so many ways. Everybody is like, oh, I wish I was 10 years younger. I wish that I had known at 22 what I know at 48 or whatever it is. And I disagree. Like, I think that this is a lucky business where you can continue to get better at this. I know I'm a better writer now than I was 5 years ago. And I'm a better writer 5 years ago than I was 10 years before that. So there's an excitement for me as I have sort of rededicated to the process, it is just it's fun to see something that you can grow at as you age and you have more things to write about, different ways to write about things. That part is really exciting to me, where the writing and the record making used to kind of be the intimidating part because I hadn't done it. Now I've done it enough. I'm you know production and working on other people's records. There's a confidence in the creative process and a fascination with that I was way more scared of when I was a kid. So that's exciting for me to have that to keep me going too, to realize that I can still. I don't think I've written the best song I'm ever going to write or anything like that. And I've written some really great songs. I'm proud of the work I've done, but I don't think that I don't look at my. I don't spend a lot of time looking at my body of work. But if I do, I don't look back on it and go like, well, it was good while it lasted. Like it's over now. Like I feel like as I sit down each day to try to write or start working on things, I still see those things in there. Like, okay, this is going to be something that I'm really excited and really proud of.
Yeah, you've got a growth mindset around it, which I can really
Yeah.
appreciate. And we were talking previously about Carousel and then Atlantic and Blackbird, and then sort of leaving to create the America EP, and that's really where when you started to kind of get a little more political with your work. And then I don't want to go too deep into every album, although I would love to do a separate interview where we dig into your
Let's
discography.
do it.
But
I love it.
yeah, I'm down. But briefly, I am going to mention each, and if you just maybe just a note on sort of what it means to you or where your life was during it. Um, so we talked about the America EP, and what was sort of the reaction to this pretty political EP?
It was interesting. There were guys in the band that hated it and didn't want to do it because I don't think they aligned uh, to that school of thought, which is hilarious to me because the school of thought to me was that we should just try to be decent to people, and I don't think that's a crazy school of thought. But that was also the first time when that record came out. Steve Earle had come to see the record release show at the Exit Inn. So, again, was I going to be upset that the drummer that didn't like the political nature of the record was mad, or was I going to be excited that Steve Earle, one of the foremost songwriting troubadours of my generation, thought that the record was cool enough to pay $20 and come see us play? I was going with that. So that was exciting. I felt like it kind of um, it opened I don't know if it put me on a path, but it at least opened a door, I think, where like, hey, if you'd like to be considered a bit more of a serious songwriter, there's room at the table if you want to come have a seat, which was cool.
Yeah, that's definitely validating. And from there, the Man Who Killed Love, that was next.
Yeah, I'll kind of defer to you. I think that sounds right. That was a hard record to make. That was the first time I worked with Ken Coomer and Charlie Bracco. We were so busy at the time as a band. That record was made in probably 12 or 15 different studios. It was made in just like we would come home for a day and we would spend a day in the studio and get right back on the bus and leave, which is a terrible, terrible way to make a record. And I hated Ken and Charlie, who are two of my. Charlie has since passed away, but one of my favorite humans, and I worked with him a ton. Ken is one of my closest friends, and I love him. We got one. Pocket Full of Change was the first song that we recorded on the record, and I remember I hated them. They hated me. I thought we were for sure not going to do more than that one song. I remember leaving the first studio, and calling my manager in California and just saying, like, pull the plug. I don't want to do this. And I think they had called their manager or my manager and said the same thing, like, he's a dick, just pull the plug. Um, and my manager, who was really astute and smart, he was like, listen, go back in the morning and listen with a fresh ear, see what you think. And we went back in the next day, and I was like, oh, this is actually kind of cool. And it became a relationship. Like I said, it's a lifelong friendship, and we made a bunch of cool records together. But that was a hard one to make, but it was a fun one.
You talked about at some points, sort of blaming the industry and the business and all these other things other than yourself. And when you say Pocket Full of Change, obviously I can hear it. And was that one of those instances? Like, do you feel like some of your songs were that way as well?
Yeah, and I mean, and there's some truth in it too. I mean, I don't want to sit here and paint a rosy picture. Like the music business is set up to take advantage of artists. It's been that way since the '40s. I mean, that's not new and that's not unique to me. Um, so there are moments in those songs. I mean, that song in particular where it talks about, the man in Hollywood says that we ain't any good, won't give us any money because we play and talk funny. I mean, that's a fairly direct quote because it was one of those things like we were too country for what they wanted out of rock bands, but we were too rock for what they would have wanted out of country bands. Um, and I wasn't gonna. Probably a more astute business person would have picked a lane and gone for one that would have made it work. But I didn't want to do that. I love.
I'm glad you
Well,
didn't.
thanks. Yeah, I don't. I don't regret that at all. Like I said, so there's moments in those songs that are pretty honest about the business. The bigger part that was my own attitude or comments about certain things at that time probably were more off base than the songs themselves.
That makes sense. And um, so, Man Who Killed Love, and then I thought it was a good album. You had a different sound. I know it sounds like you were disjointed in terms of recording it, but um, and then Draw the Curtains came next, which I think is a masterpiece. And kind of where was your head at around then? What, because it sounded very different from the previous album. And again, I'm trying not to dig too deep for the non-music nerds listening, but
Yeah, well, Man Who Killed Love was this really full, at the time, the band was really big. I mean, obviously, I was playing guitar and singing. I had a lead guitar player, bass drum. Two girls singing backgrounds, had keys. Oftentimes, there were horns. Um, Everything was really big, and we were taking a lot of that on the road. So the shows were just these massive affairs, it felt like, and there was a ton going on, and it was really fun. But in the middle of that, because we were really busy at the time, um, we were gone all the time, and it was just, I think people's lives were starting to sort of fall apart because of it. Um, and so I found myself when it was time to go, and I had written the songs that were going to be Draw the Curtains, and a lot of the band had left. And so I was in this spot where I was like, well, what do I do? I don't want to. I don't know, what do I do? I try to put a band back together and do all that, and I was working again with Ken and Charlie, and Ken is a great drummer. He played in Uncle Tupelo and he was in Wilco, and he's just done a ton of other things. One of my favorite drummers. And so I said, well, what if, we talked about it. I was like, well, what if we just made the record? So we recorded everything basically with just Ken and I in the studio. I would play acoustic guitar and he'd play drums, and we would play very differently. And then we brought in Tim Marks to play bass, and Pat Buchanan played a lot of the guitar. Reese Winans played some keys. So that was again, a little bit like the America EP was kind of a moment. There were a lot of people, I think, fan wise, that really hated that record because they had gotten so attached to what The Man Who Killed Love was. And again, it was important for me. I don't want to be the artist. Like, I'm not going to make Man Who Killed Love part 2, and then The Man Who Killed Love part 3. I don't want to do that. And I thought that those songs for Draw the Curtains were really in need of a treatment that was a little more sparse, and it was a lonelier sounding record. My folks were going through a divorce. And as a grown up, that's a weird thing to deal with as a grown man. And working, I had just met my wife, my girlfriend who became my wife. So sort of falling in love for the first time and doing these things that I thought I would never do as far as being in a committed long-term relationship. And then also watching the one long-term relationship I'd spent my life seeing fall apart. There was a lot of emotional, un, un, unsettling sort of emotional things going on at that point. So I think that was reflected in the record. Probably.
If you're enjoying this episode, I would greatly appreciate if you could review, like, comment, or subscribe on your favorite platforms. Your engaged support goes a long way in helping the show grow and getting our impactful guests heard. Now back to the show. Well, it comes through When I Can Afford to Lose. I'm Sorry Now. Some of my favorite songs ever. Really powerful and emotional. So yeah, certainly a record I loved, and maybe the one I love the most. It's hard for me is The Wreckage. Draw the Curtains, probably The Wreckage, Draw the Curtains, Blackbird's up there, Nostalgia, but The Wreckage was next. And for me, just music kind of puts me in a place and time when I think about it. And so, The Wreckage, I think, came out my senior year of college. So it's just, when I hear the songs, it brings me back there. And, where does it, when you hear or play songs from The Wreckage, where does that take you back to?
Well, again, that was a weird time because we had come off of, Draw the Curtains. Like I said, I think a lot of people didn't love at the start, but then it kind of settled in. I think people were like, oh, these songs are good. And there's a little bit more range sonically that can be covered. I had hit my stride, I think, with Ken and with Charlie, and realizing that I could just surround myself with whoever I wanted to make whatever kind of record I wanted to make. And so we had gone in to make The Wreckage, and we were about 70% done. That's when and I was leaving the studio one night. That's when my accident happened. And so that sidetracked the whole process for over a year.
And just to fill the audience in, if you don't mind reliving a horrible experience, just kind of a brief of what happened.
Yeah, I had a little motor scooter at the time. My oldest son was April, May, June, July, 6 months old. We had finished about 5 days in the studio, and I was coming back home, and I got hit head on by a 15-passenger van that was turning into a gas station. Yeah, and it broke tons of bones and shattered, crushed lungs and broke legs and broke ribs. And I spent months in the ICU and learned to walk again and did all of those things. It's the first time in years where I didn't really worry about music. I mean, I just was home, with a brand new wife. We'd gotten married in January. My son was born in April the previous year. We had gotten married in January, and the accident was in August. And so it was just, we were in no place I hadn't had any real quote unquote success. It's not like I was just ready to take years off. So it was a really stressful and weird time with so many wonderful things going on, and then this sort of big bag of shit that you get handed too.
You were supposed to record with a big name the next day, weren't you?
Yeah, Springsteen was in town, and there was a song that we were going to do on that record that he was going to come play guitar on. Obviously, he didn't, and I didn't go to the show. I couldn't make it. But so we, over the course of probably the next 18 months, I started, by the end of it, I couldn't tour, obviously, but I could at least start to write again. And I was able to focus in a way that I probably hadn't, because I hadn't had time like that in years. I started writing with a few other people just as co-writers to kind of keep my mind moving forward. And that's where, I wrote a whole bunch of new songs. So we ended up coming back, and I think we only kept 2, maybe 3 from that original. And I felt really great about them, but I think I had written better songs. That's where Even If It Breaks Your Heart came from. And that was an interesting moment. That was this, I had heard for years with every record. The Suits would always say, you're just one song away. You just need your hit song. And they swore that Even If It Breaks Your Heart was that song. And, when that record came out, we put that record out and really felt like that was our moment. And it just didn't do much for me. And then obviously, the Eli Young band had heard a version of it, and they recorded it and put it out. And
how does that happen? They just heard it and they're like, we want to cover this?
It's that simple. I mean, yes, that was it. And then I didn't know. Again, I grew up here, so I understand. You hear those stories all the time, but I'd never lived it. I didn't know what that meant. But when my manager called and said, he had heard from this band, they were going to record that song. I thought that was cool, but I didn't know what that meant. And it was at least another year before they said, okay, they're recording, it's coming out on the record. And then it was probably another 6 or 10 months when it was like, they're going to actually put it out as a single. And then it was a year as it climbs the charts and does all these things. It was just it was an amazing thing to witness, and and another real learning moment for me to realize why I won't ever have a hit song like that as an artist, because I don't have the tools at my disposal that it takes to reach that kind of critical mass. And that's not a complaint, that's just a realization. um, but so that, to all of a sudden get nominated for awards and
Yeah, and I mean, don't sell yourself short. In 2012, you were nominated for a Grammy for Country Song of the Year. I mean, what was that validating?
yeah,
What did
it
that
was
mean to
cool.
you?
It was cool as hell. I mean, I'll make jokes about losing a Grammy all the time, or losing the ACM or losing the CMA. I mean, I lost all of them. But the cliche of it being an honor to be nominated is really true. I mean, it is. It was so cool, and it changed the perception. All of a sudden, I was a songwriter, not just an artist, and so that led to, because I own my own publishing, which is a whole nother lovely conversation. Um, but then, I kept the publishing on that song, and then a big company came in and signed me to a publishing deal to write songs for 3 or 4 years. So the tail of that kind of commercial success was long and glorious, and that was fun. I mean, I'd love to have it happen again at some point.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I mean, there's been a couple of other attempts, right? I know Lady A, they did one of your songs, right?
Yeah, and there's always, that's always kind of sniffing around, and you just see. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about Nashville is there's always artists that are looking for songs, and there are things kind of in the works now. And I have learned to just, it's always flattering and exciting when anybody calls and asks for a song, and I do my best to get them something that I think they'll dig, and then I just wash my hands of it. I can't sit around and worry about, are they going to record it? I don't know. If they record it, they'll send me checks. If they don't, I'll keep doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the accident was just such a huge thing to happen to your life. How did it change the course of your future?
I mean, it made my legs hurt for the rest of my life. It made, made my back hurt for the rest of my life. There's physical things. I mean, there was a lot of emotional trauma that came with that, mental and emotional work that I had probably never really had to deal with. I finally had to. I mean, and you're coupling with that trauma also my wife. I mean, we had gotten pregnant when she was still in school. We weren't married, so there was a lot. Our lives were. It was just a hurricane or tornado, for a good couple of years there. I mean, we went from just being boyfriend and girlfriend, and I'm on the road, and she's going to be in the music business, to she's going to work in schools, and we have a kid, and we're married, and I've got to do a year and a half's worth of rehab, and it was just insane. So there was a lot of learning in that period, which I needed. There was a forced growing up, some of the innocence, I think, of the business and the relationship stuff at large. It really became something that was, it put everything into a focus that I had probably not, I hadn't needed before that, and I had to have it at that point.
That makes sense. Well, I'm not that far through your albums list, and I could probably talk about them forever. So we're gonna skip over some, so I can get to some of my other
All right,
questions. But
great. I like
again,
the idea. Let's come back
let's
and
do
do
the
each
full.
album one day. I'd love to. I'd love to do that. That sounds
Yes,
fun.
100%.
All right.
So I'm gonna skip a few, but one I wanted to talk about was Small Town Dreams. Was this one of the bigger commercial successes? It has some really, I think, relatable songs to a lot of people on it.
Yeah, well, that sort of came out of the tail of the wreckage, with Even If It Breaks Your Heart and the nominations for the awards and stuff that you mentioned. It was the first time of me having to go out and do press, because they would want you to go to the award show. And I don't mean that like, woe is me. That's what they wanted. So you'd go and you'd walk the red carpet and you'd talk about all this shit, and you'd go talk to radio people. And I realized that a ton of people that were in that genre and that world had come from the 96 waves of the world and weren't unfamiliar. And I heard so many people like, man, it's so great to get to play Will Hoge song at this format, like, you should make a record, like we could play your music, blah blah blah. And again, you hear this. I don't want to be the artist or the person, not the artist. I don't want to be 95 years old, sitting on my front porch in a rocking chair, hopefully grandkids and great grandkids, and going, man, I wish I had tried something different. Like I want to have swung, for the fences when I had the opportunity. And so there was an interesting thing. Like I said, I was writing a bunch post, even if it breaks your heart. I had that publishing deal, and there was a lot of things happening. A lot of other artists in that genre were cutting my songs, and there were things that were starting to happen. So I had this batch of songs that I think really fit in that world, and I made a conscious effort with a conscientious decision with my manager at the time. I said, look, I really want to make, I thought about the records that I had heard as a kid growing up, whether that was, Born in the USA or it was Scarecrow by John Mellencamp, these just massively commercial, right down the middle, hook laden, sing along records. And I thought I had the songs to do it. And my friend Marshall Altman ended up producing, and he's somebody I've known for years, and he understands that lane really, really well. And we went in and did it and made a really honest effort. We devised all of these schemes to try and um, break into that world, and it kind of worked. To the point that I realized this is not where I want to be and what I want to do. And so, again, I think the rock and roll gods kind of look like, okay, motherfucker, is really what you want? It was like, no, it's really not what I want. I still love those songs. There's a lot of things on that record. I'm still proud of the record. There's a lot of things on that still stand up and show up in shows now.
Absolutely.
But thanks. Yeah, I think that was probably my last hoorah towards, okay, let me see if I can hit the grand slam. And I tried, and the answer is I can't. So now I'm going to just try to go hit a single or a double every now and then.
Well, that's certainly respectable, and it was a cool experiment. And it's come through a little bit, or it's come through a few different times that you've done more rock, you've done more country, you've done things in between, and that not being on one or the other sort of made it tough with some of the bigger labels and things like that along the way. Do you have sort of a genre that you consider your music? I mean, when I tell people about you, I say it's kind of, there's some more country, some that's more rock, and everything in between.
I mean, I think the short answer that I always find myself giving is that it's just rock and roll. Because at the end of the day, everything I love about rock and roll is a little bit of those things. I mean, rock and roll is a little bit. It is based. I mean, Chuck Berry is just playing revved up country songs. I mean, Hank Williams is just playing countrified rock and roll songs. So I don't know. I think that's probably. I think the new trend is to call it Americana, which I'm also fine with. I don't really refer to it very often. I just make it and let somebody else figure it out.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I encourage everybody listening to check out all of your music. Reach out to me if you want any specific recommendations. But the newest album, Wings on My Shoes, is awesome. So big fan. Hope you continue to create more and more music.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I definitely will.
And I'll save some of the questions I'm skipping over for our future music interview. But I want to talk about sending a message with music. We talked about you really getting into that with the America EP. And we also talked about how Atlantic kind of pushed against you. Were there other managers or executives over the years that wanted you to tone that down?
Not really. The really fortunate thing at the time that I was doing the America EP, the manager that I worked with for a long time, he had sort of always been supportive of it. I think wanted me to be more of an artist with more depth than just here's a sing along chorus that you can put on the radio. So no, I was always pretty fortunate with that. And by the time I started to do more of it, I had established myself enough as that loudmouth. So I don't think nobody was going to come in and manage me and be like, you want to do what? It's like, oh, okay, of course he wants to do that. So no, that hasn't been a bridge that was hard to cross since the first time.
And we mentioned Southern Man earlier about sort of your thoughts changing from how you grew up. And I remember a show in Denver that I went to. The story I recall you telling is that the bus broke down on the way. You ended up just coming by yourself. It was going to be the whole band. And I believe that was the first time you'd played Thoughts and Prayers because of a recent tragedy, which it's sickening that I don't recall which tragedy, but
No, it's yeah, that's true. I wrote that in the dressing room at the Bluebird Theater in Denver, and played it that night. And I'm with you. I think that was probably Charleston's shooting at the church was Southern Man. It was a school shooting.
that's the world we live in right now. Unfortunately, there's so many of these tragedies
Yeah,
that
it's really
it's hard to
heartbreaking.
place which was which.
Yeah, and it was hard. I remember at the
Sickening.
time because at that point it was another one of the elementary school situations, maybe high school situation. But at the time, my kids were both in the same school that my wife was in, which is an elementary school just down the street from where we live. And those things just hit really close to home when everything you love is in a 20,000 square foot building, and it just takes one person to go in there and ruin all of that. Yeah, that was a tough one, but that was a fun show. In spite of not because of that, but the roller coaster of being on the road and things breaking down, and it's supposed to be a band show, and it ends up being just me and writing that song beforehand. That's cool. I didn't realize. I don't think I realized you were there for that one. That was a moment that I was always real proud of. I mean, I had to write the lyrics down on like a bar napkin, and I think even read them as I was playing it. But yeah, I'm real proud of that one.
Yeah, and as an audience member, it's really cool to kind of see live development going on. So I really appreciate that. And a couple of other sort of statement songs that came to mind. One being "A Legal Line." Just to me, a song about immigration and how hard it can be, and how a lot of times people are only breaking rules because they're in circumstances where they have to, and the rules are often unfair and unjust.
Yeah, and I have tried to really learn, like we talked about earlier, as you grow and you see the world. I mean, it's easy to sit in one's privilege and judge somebody for doing things when they're in a really hard situation and say, well, I wouldn't do that. But, when I sit here and think, what would I do if they told me that I couldn't work in Tennessee anymore and there was nothing here and I could illegally cross the border into Kentucky and work and send money back to my family? Yeah, I'd fucking do it. Yeah, exactly what I would do. And, it bothers me that so many folks cast a negative light on the men. My wife's a counselor and works a ton with the immigrant population here in town. And when I hear the stories of these little kids that are in the fourth grade that haven't had a chance to see their mother in person because she's still in Guatemala, and they haven't seen her in 4 years and they're 8 years old. I mean, those are the things that, and their dad is here working every day, and they live 3 and 4 families in an apartment, and they're just trying to make a better life for their kids. And the fact that we as a society shun that instead of opening the doors and going, what we need is more of this. We need more people that come here and believe in that American dream and are willing to work every day to make all of our lives more rich and better. That's one of those I'm flabbergasted that there's another side to that argument. That's an argument is funny to me.
It's crazy, and I mean, we've got plenty of room, especially for motivated people that want to work and take care of their families. It makes me sick for sure, and I just I think about my family in the Holocaust and then eventually immigrating to the U.S. Like they certainly dealt with some unwelcomeness at times, a lot of it, but they were able to get in, and I just to think that there's people that need an escape and they can't just come into our country that's supposed to be this free place. It breaks my heart. And so that song's always been moving.
And I understand there need to be rules on it and all of that, but then we need to, there need to be rules that are as easy as they can be to make sure that we're vetting, and we have that, and the idea that if somebody is lucky enough to have snuck in, then we need to move them through the pipeline quickly to get them the paperwork that they need. And just, I don't know. There are so many other things for us to spend our time and effort worrying about. That just doesn't seem like one for me.
Right. Right. We should nourish this pipeline of motivated people that are humans just like us. So
Yeah, absolutely.
another one that I think is just a beautiful tribute to in a really sad situation is the Ballad of Trayvon Martin.
Hmm.
And obviously that was a really tough time in our country and tough situation, but beautiful tribute to someone that lost their life way too soon. Um, and you have a variety of other songs that are really important like that one. And given how divisive our world is these days and all the keyboard warriors at home, do you have to deal with threats? What is it like for you? And you're the type that is like, if someone says they're a fan but they say something hateful, it's like, I don't want you as a fan anymore.
Yeah, I mean, there's, early on there were the hate letters and the threats a lot of times from, the Klan would still reach out and do shit like that. That has sort of died down for me. I have family members that are activists that are far more involved in the political side of things, and they have it a whole. I mean, I'm a rock and roll singer that occasionally dips a couple of toes into that world and ruffles a feather or two, but it's not something that I don't live in fear of that. I don't think I have that kind of reach, and I think I have culled the herd enough to. I think most people either agree or don't wholly agree, but also respect and go like, okay, let me think about that from a slightly different perspective. I don't think anybody that's sending vitriolic emails and things like that. If I've gotten better about just not responding at all. But if I even dig in, a lot of times with a click or two, you go, oh, this person's never even been on my page before. Like, this isn't somebody that's a fan. This is just somebody that is a bot or whatever. And so I don't worry. I don't worry too much about those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's an interesting world that we live in. And for every, similar to our media right now, I think for every bad story there's plenty of good stories. And so are there fans that have told you how much these songs mean to them, and how does that feel for you?
It's really cool. One of my favorite things is seeing over the last, and I think especially the last 5 or 6 years. Well, there's the COVID thing in the middle, but so maybe 6 or 7 years, right before COVID and then post COVID, to watch the fan base really diversify, where I think it used to just be a whole lot of white guys and girls. You're starting to see more folks of color, more LGBTQ people that I think, one, are feeling, I would say emboldened, but that's the wrong word. They're just feeling equal in their own lives to be able to go and see the music that they want to see. And I think that what I've done as an artist, what we've done as a band, with the records we've made, and the stances we've taken, and the shows we do, and how we present ourselves, and the fan base realizing that, again, this is just sort of the way this is going to go now. You want to be on board? Cool. This is the deal. We're going to be cool with everyone coming to this show. So watching that grow has been really exciting. And I hope that that's something, not even so much for me, but for those marginalized groups to be able to go like, look, I like this kind of music. I want to be able to go see it and not feel unsafe. And that can be just from a single female that just doesn't want to come and have drunken frat boys trying to take her home and being rude and gropey. That shit just doesn't happen anymore. We've just really established that this is a place that you want to come and feel safe and hear the music and have a great time and laugh and cry and dance a little and have a drink and hug some people and go home and tell your friends and do it again the next time.
The vibes in the audience definitely have changed since the days, as you call it in one song, the smoky bars, like back in the Music Farm days. And the two most recent shows I saw were in Boulder and Fort Collins, and they were like, the environment was just, it was like a subdued, relaxed environment that felt like really appreciative of the music. And I was curious, like, did you specifically go for that, like, on this tour? Was that just a happenstance for the two shows that I saw? I loved it. Like that one at E-Town Hall in Boulder, that was one of my favorite shows I've ever been to, man. Like, and it was like we're all sitting in pews and like, but man, it was amazing.
No, that's been fun. Like I say, there was a moment, you know, I feel like the audience had grown and grown and grown to a point, and then the wreckage really pushed it to a place where that was the largest crowds we were ever playing for. And then when we put out Small Town Dreams and had, you know, radio in a world that was reaching more people than we'd ever reached, and we were playing way bigger shows than we'd ever played before. But I realized real early on they were just people that there were a lot of those folks there that did not care at all about the music. They really were there to hear, they want to hear that one song on the radio. And I had seen a little bit of that in the early 2000s, you know, with um, even the success and the skyrocket shit that happened in Charleston. There was a moment like, oh, some of these people don't care. They're just here because they heard this on the radio. And, you know, it's like,
You'd be playing like you'd be playing like Baby
yeah,
Girl and people would be screaming for Not That Cool
yeah,
of
or
You.
there's just somebody
Yeah.
yapping in the corner. And so I had to make a conscious decision to either, I wanted to make a conscious decision. Either you're going to be the artist that you want, and you're going to have to lose some of these people and some money and all of those things. But that was, I wouldn't have been, by the end of the touring for Small Town Dreams, I was at a place where I wasn't sure I even could do this anymore. It was so um, kind of negative and soul sucking for me. It was more successful in some ways than I'd ever been, but that's not what I want to do for success. And so, yeah, I think that cultivating an audience that understands why they're there and what they're there for, um, it's been funny to watch that go back down and now slowly start to come back and start seeing more people coming back and realizing like, oh, you know, and we can still do the big rock stuff. We can do the small quiet stuff. I can do solo stuff and band stuff. And I'm real proud of that continuing to grow.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it and I've enjoyed it. Just want to share that. And you mentioned sort of the doors that it's opened, that some of your music is open, and the audiences that can feel more welcome. Is there any particular story of somebody that came up to you or messaged you saying like, this song changed my life, or you really made me feel X, that just really blew you away?
Yeah, there's lots of those. I mean, you know, and you get it from all sorts of different levels. I mean, you know, you get it on songs like Baby Girl that you mentioned. I mean, there's so many people that will come to me and say, like, I danced to with my dad for the father-daughter dance at my wedding, or I played that song for my daughter, and then, you know, here's my daughter, she's 20 now. And those things are cool. You know, even if it breaks your heart, there's musicians will tell me often that one resonate. I mean, there's all sorts of things. And then there's the stuff that's more political. I mean, when we were out with Social Distortion, their head of security was from a first generation American family, and dad and mom had come across the border. And he just talked about how important that song was to him and how he cried the first time he heard it. And yeah, there's all sorts of those things that anytime that somebody takes a moment to tell you that they identify with a song and latch onto it is it sounds cliched, but it is really it's a really special thing.
So over these many years, some names have come up over and over, like your friend Ken. Is there anyone in particular that you want to mention as someone that's been a big mentor to you?
No, I mean, I think that you know, the thing is, had I been willing to really open up and have a mentor, I think I could have had a little different trajectory at times. Whether that would be better or worse, I don't know. But I mean, part of making it in this business for me was that I just had to go out and slam my head against a wall and do it how I wanted to do it. I mean, if somebody had come and said, "Hey, what about this?" I would have probably still just gone and done what I wanted to do and just piss somebody else off along the way. So, no, I think that mentors can be really important. And I'm hoping to maybe now get one later in life that I'm in a better place to be able to take that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And if you'd like, you can ask me a question.
Man, I'm just so glad that you do this. I hope that you will gather up all of your thoughts on all of the records, and we can do this again sometime. That was fun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And even just like, one thing I like to tell my guests is that, yeah, we listen, we've got like a few hundred listeners right now, but at the very least, most of my guests walk away with kind of a life story that they can share with their family and things like that. And so I love the idea of, one, me getting to talk about your music, which I enjoy, and then you kind of having that piece to walk away with.
No, it's cool, and I appreciate you taking the time to really do this in an in-depth way, and making sure that you're putting yourself out there and being willing to take the risk to try to do these things. That's really inspirational too. I appreciate you doing it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Just trying to show that, for, like I said earlier, all the bad that's going on, there's a lot of people doing great things, a lot of people standing up against hate. So, certainly I'm proud to be a fan, and I've got a couple more for you, and then we're done. If everything were to end tomorrow, what are you most proud of?
Oh, I mean, I think what my kids would become. I mean, really, I hope that that's the biggest thing. I mean, the art part is what it is. I mean, in 15 or 20 years, nobody's going to remember that one way or the other. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's a generation away from being forgotten, but my kids can move forward and really affect the world and be positive forces for a long, long time. That's what I'm most proud of.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And, I don't think your music's going to be forgotten. My little kids have already started listening, so
Well, good.
That'll keep happening. The one sort of big question that I ask every guest is, if you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world, what would it be, and how do you think that change would reverberate?
Public education would be my one. In some ways, I feel like that's small, but I know that even if we could do that on a national level here in this country, the amount of change that would affect, if we could really teach people to think and to learn, social emotional learning, critical thinking, would solve at least 99% of the problems I think that we have at this point. That would be my thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It would give people better understanding of the world and all of that comes with that. And I have had some really remarkable education innovators on my podcast: Riley Farrow Carter, Kelly Smith of Prenda, and Meredith Olson of Vela. So just sharing with those that are interested, yeah, they should definitely check those out when they get the chance. And again, so happy to have you here, and I hope that my listeners are as inspired as I am. How can people best support you and your work?
Just check out willhoge.com or any of the socials under that name, and come see a show and buy a record and tell your friends, and I hope we'll see all of y'all soon.
Thanks again. Look forward to continuing the conversation. Hope you make it back to Denver soon, or we're in the same city at some point. But yeah, it's been an absolute thrill to have you on, and look forward to talking again soon.
Man, it's great talking to you. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks for listening to this episode of People Are the Answer. If you enjoyed the episode, share it with friends, and reviews or subscriptions on your favorite platforms go a long way to help the show grow. I want to share these incredible people and their remarkable work with as many others as possible. Thanks for your support. For more, go to peoplearetheanswer.com.